Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into source material focused on a single, really powerful quality, persistence.
That's right. And our mission, for this deep dive is to really unpack what persistence is.
Okay.
Why the source material we're looking at says it's absolutely essential for achieving things. What
Right.
gets in your way when you're trying to develop it. And maybe most importantly, the concrete steps the source actually gives us for cultivating it.
And the core of our material today, it comes mostly from one place, right? Chapter 9 of a book titled think-9.pdf. It frames persistence as the eighth crucial step on the path to accumulating riches.
Woo! But you'll see, I think, as we explore it, its principles really apply to achieving any significant desire you might have.
Makes sense.
So let's dive into what this material tells us about this quality and, why it's presented not just as helpful, but as totally non-negotiable if you want to turn your desires into actual reality.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is persistence, according to this source? What's the core idea they're getting at?
Well, at its heart, this material defines persistence as that sustained effort you need to actually induce faith.
Induce faith. That's interesting.
Yeah, think about it. It's the consistent action that builds your belief, and it's presented as absolutely essential for taking a desire, whatever it is, and transforming it into its physical or its monetary equivalent.
So it's more than just wanting something badly. It's the action that makes you believe it can happen, and that belief itself helps make it happen.
Exactly. And it's fundamentally driven, the source says, by the power of will.
Okay.
It emphasizes that when your willpower and your desire, when they combine, they form what it calls an irresistible pair.
An irresistible pair. Strong stuff.
Yeah, they become incredibly potent together. And it uses this really vivid analogy.
Which is?
Persistence is to your character what carbon is to steel.
Ah, okay. I get that.
It's that crucial element that gives it strength, resilience, durability.
That makes a lot of sense. So when the source talks about people who build great fortunes being misunderstood,
Yeah.
it's like seen as cold-blooded or ruthless, is it suggesting that what we're actually seeing is just this powerful mix of willpower and persistence applied relentlessly?
That's basically the argument, yeah. It says what they truly possess is that potent combo willpower and persistence put squarely behind their desires, driving them forward. And Henry Ford is the classic example given here. His reputation for being, relentless, it really stemmed from his habit of persistently following through on all his plans.
Okay, so if persistence is the carbon in the steel, this irresistible force, why is it so hard for so many of us? The source is pretty blunt about this challenge, right? The lack of persistence being a huge barrier.
Oh, it doesn't pull any punches at all. The material states pretty flatly that the vast majority of people just give up.
Right.
Yeah, at the very first hint of opposition, the first setback, the first bit of misfortune, it says only a small fraction, a few people, actually carry on despite facing real opposition until they hit their goal.
And it points to this tendency, this giving up easily, as a major cause of failure.
Absolutely. Calls it a weakness common to the majority. But, and this is important, here's the good news the source offers.
Okay.
It's not a fixed trait. It's presented as a weakness that can absolutely be overcome through effort. Conscious effort.
That's encouraging. So it's not like, how tall you are. It's more like a muscle you can actually train.
Exactly like a muscle. And the source says the ease with which you conquer this weakness, it depends entirely on how intense your desire is.
Back to desire.
Right, think about it. Weak desire, weak results. Like a tiny spark versus a roaring fire. If you find yourself lacking persistence, the source's advice is pretty straightforward. Build a stronger fire under your desires. Make what you want burn hotter.
It also sort of frames applying the book's principles as a test of persistence itself, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. If you read the instructions, those initial steps for turning desire into reality, and then you just kind of slip back into your old routine without actually doing them. The source suggests that indifference is a pretty clear sign. It shows you haven't acquired what it calls the necessary money consciousness.
Money consciousness.
Yeah, which it describes as this specific mindset needed to attract fortunes. Fortunes, it argues, are drawn to minds that are prepared for them, kind of like water finds its way downhill to the ocean.
Okay, so if it's a weakness we can fix, and the intensity of our desire is key, how else does the source say we should go about building this crucial quality? How do we actually train that persistence muscle?
Well, first, like we just said, it's about fueling that intense desire. That's fundamental.
Right.
But beyond that, the material points to focusing your attention on instructions from earlier sections, like the one on power. And crucially, it emphasizes surrounding yourself with what it calls a mastermind group.
Okay, let's pause there. Mastermind group. What does the source mean by that specifically?
Right. So the source defines a mastermind as basically a friendly alliance.
Mm.
It's one or more people who work together in perfect harmony toward a common goal.
Oh.
The idea is that through the cooperative effort, the support you get from a group like that, you can significantly boost your own persistence.
So it's about having accountability, maybe mutual encouragement.
Precisely. It also points to the techniques in chapters on autosuggestion and the subconscious mind as vital aids.
Autosuggestion. What's the source's take on that here?
It's basically the practice of feeding ideas or suggestions to yourself, repeating your definite purpose, your plans, over and over with real emotion and belief to really impress them onto your subconscious mind.
Got it.
The goal is to use habit, use autosuggestion to hand a clear picture of your desire and your plan over to your subconscious.
And the subconscious is like always on, day and night.
Correct. Awake or asleep, it takes over the continuous work. But, and the source is really clear on this, spasmodic or occasional effort will be of no value.
So no dabbling.
Exactly. This isn't a hobby. You must apply these rules consistently until they become a fixed habit. That's the only way it insists to develop the necessary persistence.
It sounds like you're basically replacing the old habit of quitting or giving up too soon with the new habit of persisting.
That's a great way to put it. And it contrasts this with what it calls poverty consciousness,
Okay.
which it says develops almost automatically, by default, if your mind isn't actively engaged in cultivating money consciousness. That positive, proactive mindset, it argues, has to be created to order. It requires conscious effort and persistent habit.
There's a really powerful analogy the source uses about this, isn't there? Comparing it to waking from a nightmare.
Yes, that's a really striking one. You know that feeling, maybe you've had it, half awake, can't move, feel like you're suffocating or paralyzed.
Yeah, a bit terrifying.
Right, and you realize you have to regain control. The source says through persistent effort of willpower, you start small. Maybe you just manage to move a finger, then maybe an arm, then a leg, until finally, with this one supreme effort of will, you snap yourself fully awake.
Okay.
It compares this directly to gaining control over your own will through persistent effort. It urges you to keep at it, be persistent, no matter how slow or tiny the progress feels at first, because that consistent effort is what eventually breaks through.
And that mastermind group we mentioned, that seems like a really practical way to get that external push when your own internal willpower might be, flagging a bit.
Absolutely. A carefully chosen group can provide exactly the crucial person or people who will help you specifically develop persistence, offer support, different viewpoints, keep you accountable.
Makes sense.
The source also makes an interesting little side note. Some people develop persistence purely out of necessity.
How so?
They're driven by circumstances, pushed into a corner where they have to be persistent just to survive or escape a bad situation. And that intense pressure forges the habit in them.
So, okay, you put in all this effort, you build this persistence. What's the payoff? The source makes a pretty big claim about the reward, doesn't it?
It really does. It makes this absolute statement. There is no substitute for persistence. Full stop. It cannot be replaced by any other quality, any shortcut.
Wow.
The book suggests remembering this very statement can be a source of strength when you're hitting those inevitable difficulties, especially early on.
It's presented almost like an insurance policy against failure.
That's exactly how the source frames it. Those who cultivate the habit of persistence seem to possess an almost literal insurance against failure. It says no matter how many times they might get knocked down along the way, they ultimately reach their goal. They get to the top.
And then there's this really intriguing, almost mystical idea it introduces about a hidden guide. What's that about?
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept. The material suggests there might be some kind of hidden guide or force whose job it is to test people, specifically through discouraging experiences, through setbacks. And only those who have the character, the grit to pick themselves up after defeat and keep trying, only they pass this persistence test.
So failure isn't just failure. It's framed as a kind of test of your worthiness for the goal you're aiming for.
That's the implication, yes. And those who can take it, as the source puts it, those who persist through that test. are, the source
Hmm.
claims, bountifully rewarded. They receive whatever goal they were pursuing. For them, defeat is never the end state, it's temporary. And it actually becomes an urge, a spur for greater effort, which eventually transforms into victory.
Wow.
It even speaks of a silent but irresistible power that comes to the rescue of those who keep fighting, even when they're discouraged and everything looks like defeat.
Now, this isn't just abstract theory in the source, right?
Yeah.
It really brings persistence to life with some incredibly compelling stories,
Oh, absolutely. It starts with a look at Broadway, which describes this really powerful image.
which is,
Both the graveyard of dead hopes and the front porch of opportunity.
wow, that's a contrast.
Isn't it? And it states emphatically that success there, on Broadway, only comes after you have definitively refused to QIT. The underlying secret, it claims, is always, always persistence.
And he gives the story of Fannie Hurst as an example.
A prime example, yeah. She came to New York, this is 1915, with a really clear goal: turn her writing into riches.
Okay.
It took her 4 years. 4 years of relentless labor, hoping, and sheer persistence. And get this.
What?
She received 36 rejection slips from one single publisher before they finally accepted one of her stories.
36
Yeah.
from one publisher? That's unbelievable. Most people would give up after maybe the third one.
Absolutely. Can you imagine the total stack of rejections she must have had? But her intense determination just drove her to keep going, to pound the pavements, as the source says, and keep pounding out stories until defeat finally turned into victory.
And then things changed.
Dramatically. Once she passed that persistence test, the source notes, publishers started seeking her out. The money came quickly then. Her story is used really strongly to illustrate that wherever you find great riches accumulated, the quality of persistence was acquired first.
And Kate Smith is another example from that world, right? Performance.
She is. Kate Smith sang for years, apparently, without pay, before any microphone she could find in any dive or hall.
Wow.
The source frames it like Broadway itself was challenging her. Come and get it if you can take it.
So she took the challenge.
She did. She persisted year after year until Broadway finally yielded. And then she named her price, which the source points out was incredibly high. Like 1 week's salary was more than many people made in a whole year back then.
And the source explicitly contrasts her success with, what, thousands of other singers?
Yeah, maybe tens of thousands, it suggests, of arguably better singers, technically speaking, who failed simply because they lacked that courage, that grit to keep on keeping on.
It really hammers home that talent alone isn't enough. Persistence is the crucial difference maker.
It makes that point very, very strongly. And it also tackles the idea of breaks or luck.
Right. Yeah, what does it say about that? Just wait for your lucky break.
No, quite the opposite. The source says relying solely on luck for success is a path that pretty much only leads to disappointment.
Right.
The only truly reliable break, it argues, is a self-made one. And that self-made break comes directly through applying persistence, which always starts with having that clear, definite purpose.
And it backs this up with some powerful comeback stories, too.
It does, yeah. W.C. Fields, for example, lost everything in the Depression, was considered old, even injured his neck seriously.
Right.
Yet he offered to work for free in a new field for him, movies. He persisted, and that persistence brought what looked like breaks, but the source argues they weren't random chance at all.
They were earned.
Exactly. Marie Dressler, too, found herself broke at 60, persisted, and achieved this astounding, triumphant late-life career. And Eddie Cantor lost his fortune in the '29 crash, but used persistence and courage to build his way back up to earning, like, $10,000 a week.
Incredible stories.
They are. And the source uses them as evidence that if you have persistence, you can often get along very well, achieve great things, even if you feel like you're lacking in other qualities. Persistence, it suggests, can compensate for a lot.
Okay, so the source doesn't just rely on stories. It actually breaks down the underlying structure, right? It lists 8 specific foundations that persistence is built on. These sound like things we could actually analyze in ourselves.
They absolutely are. It lists 8 definite factors, calls them the basis of persistence. And yeah, it encourages you to honestly assess yourself against them. See where you're strong, where you might need to, shore things up.
All right, let's quickly go through them. What's number 1?
First, and maybe most important, is definiteness of purpose. Knowing exactly what you want. That's presented as the single most crucial step. Having that clear, strong motive is what helps you push through when things get tough.
Clarity on the destination makes the journey bearable, maybe even possible.
That's a good way to put it. Second is desire. Simply put, it's much easier to be persistent when you're chasing something you intensely, passionately desire. The stronger the desire, the more fuel you have for persistence.
Back to that burning fire analogy again.
Exactly. Third is self-reliance, a firm belief in your own ability to actually carry out your plan. That encourages you to follow through with persistence. This connects back to that idea of auto-suggestion we talked about earlier.
Believing you can do it.
Right. Fourth, definiteness of plans. Having organized plans, even if they aren't perfect right away and need adjusting, gives you a roadmap, and that encourages persistence. Just having a vague wish isn't enough.
So having a plan, even an imperfect one, is better than just winging it.
Yes, definitely. Fifth is accurate knowledge. Knowing your plans are sound based on actual experience or observation, not just guesswork, that gives you solid ground and fuels persistence. The source is clear. Guessing destroys persistence.
Certainty that comes from reality, not just hope.
Correct. Sixth is cooperation. Getting sympathy, understanding, and harmonious cooperation from others helps significantly in developing persistence. This is where that mastermind idea really comes into its own again.
So community collaboration, those are foundations too, not just solo effort.
Absolutely. Seventh is willpower. This is about the habit of concentrating your thoughts, focusing your energy on building and executing plans for your definite purpose. That focused mental and emotional effort directly leads to persistence.
Directing your energy intentionally, not letting it scatter.
Precisely. And finally, number 8 is habit. Persistence itself is presented as a direct result of habit. Your mind absorbs and becomes a reflection of your daily experiences, your dominant thoughts. The source even notes that fear, which is a major enemy of persistence, can be cured by forcing yourself to repeatedly act with courage. Literally building a new habit of courageous action to overwrite the old habit of fear.
Wow. Okay, so those are the pillars to build on. And the source basically says, take an honest look at yourself and see where those pillars might be a bit weak. All right, so on the flip side of those foundations, the source gives us this pretty stark list, doesn't it? 16 symptoms or enemies that indicate a lack of persistence. These sound like traps we need to watch out for.
They really are. The source calls them the real enemies standing between you and whatever you want to achieve. It provides this list of 16 symptoms or weaknesses. And yeah, it urges a really fearless, honest self-assessment if you want to understand your own potential hurdles.
16 enemies potentially lurking inside us. So quite a checklist.
It is. And they cover a really wide range. Everything from, number 1, just failing to clearly define what you want in the first place.
Back to definiteness of purpose again.
Exactly. All the way to procrastination, putting things off, usually masked with excuses or alibis.
Oh, procrastination. Yeah, know that one well.
Don't we all? Other symptoms include things like a lack of interest in getting the specialized knowledge you need for your goal, indecision constantly avoiding issues, passing the buck, as it calls it, relying on alibis instead of actually creating concrete plans to deal with problems. And a surprisingly tough one noted, self-satisfaction.
Self-satisfaction is an enemy. How so?
According to the source, yeah. If you're too easily pleased with where you are, you lack that burning drive to persist towards something bigger, something better.
Ah, okay. Complacency kills persistence.
Pretty much. The list goes on. Indifference, which means being too ready to compromise on your goals or standards, blaming others for your mistakes, or just accepting bad circumstances as unavoidable fate.
That takes away your personal power, your agency.
Exactly. Weakness of desire, again, not having that strong why, that strong motive. A willingness or even eagerness to quit at the first sign of defeat, which the source links back to our basic human fears.
Makes sense.
Lack of organized plans, especially not having them written down where you can see them and work with them, neglecting to act on ideas when they come, or failing to grasp opportunity when it knocks.
That's a lot of ways to stumble.
And there are still a few more. Number 13 is wishing instead of willing. Just wanting something passively versus actively applying your will to go get it.
Right.
14 is compromising with poverty instead of aiming for riches, which it frames as a general lack of ambition. 15 is searching for shortcuts, trying to get without giving fair value, like through gambling or trying to pull off sharp, unbalanced bargains.
Okay, that covers 15. What's the 16th? It seems like the source gives this one special weight.
It really does. The source places the 16th symptom, fear of criticism, right at the top of the list in terms of its power and how sneaky it is. It's often buried deep in the subconscious, the source says, where you might not even recognize it's pulling your strings.
Fear of criticism. Yeah, the source really zeroes in on this one as a major, pervasive, and often hidden roadblock.
It absolutely does. It makes a really powerful case that this specific fear influences the majority of people so profoundly that they actually cannot live their own authentic lives.
Why? What's the mechanism?
Because they are constantly, paralyzingly afraid of what their relatives, their friends, or just the general public will think or say or do.
It sounds incredibly limiting.
It is. And the examples the source gives are pretty stark. People making mistakes in marriage but staying stuck in unhappy situations purely out of fear of criticism. People neglecting to pursue education later in life because they're afraid of what others might say about them going back to school. Allowing relatives to, quote, wreck their lives in the name of duty, which is often rooted in this fear. Refusing to take perfectly sound business chances because the fear of being criticized if they fail outweighs their desire for success.
It even suggests this fear stops people from setting big goals in the first place.
Absolutely. The source says far too many people refuse to set high goals or even choose the career path they truly want because they fear that inevitable criticism from friends or family, people saying things like, don't aim so high, or who do you think you are, or people will think you're crazy.
An author actually shares a very personal story about this, right? Illustrating how powerful it felt.
They do, yeah. They recount the moment Andrew Carnegie first suggested they devote 20 years of their life to organizing this whole philosophy of achievement.
Okay.
The author's immediate gut reaction wasn't excitement, it was pure fear. Fear of what people would say. The suggestion felt so enormous, so far beyond anything they'd conceived for themselves, that their mind instantly started churning out alibis and excuses. And every single one, they realized later upon analysis, was rooted in that deep, inherent fear of criticism. Thoughts like, you can't possibly do that, it's too big, what will your relatives think? Remember where you came from, your humble birth, who are you to write a philosophy? People will definitely think you're completely nuts for even attempting this.
It felt like the whole world was just lining up to shoot the idea down before it even started.
The source says it felt exactly like that, and through years of analyzing thousands of people, both successful and unsuccessful, the author came to this really powerful and kind of heartbreaking conclusion. Most ideas are stillborn.
Stillborn.
Yeah, they never even see the light of day, because the fear of criticism is so potent, so widespread, that it prevents them from ever reaching the planning and action stage. The source really emphasizes that the most critical time to nurture an idea is right at its birth, and this fear is the primary killer that destroys most ideas before they ever have a chance to breathe and grow.
Okay, wow. That fear of criticism is a huge hurdle, maybe the biggest one. So knowing the foundations, knowing the obstacles, how do we actively develop this habit of persistence? The source brings it back to 4 key steps, right? Presented as quite straightforward.
Right, exactly. After laying out the whole challenge, the source provides these 4 specific steps, and it presents them as surprisingly simple. Claims they don't require, massive intelligence or lots of formal education or even huge amounts of time or effort, just consistent application. They're framed as the path to cultivating the actual habit of persistence.
So what are these 4 simple but sounds like powerful steps?
Okay, number 1, a definite purpose backed by a burning desire for its fulfillment. See? We just keep circling back to that intense desire, that clear goal. It's the absolute bedrock, the fuel.
It really seems non-negotiable in this philosophy.
It really does. Okay, 2, a definite plan expressed in continuous action. Again, notice it's not just having the plan, it's the consistent, ongoing, applied effort that actually brings it to life. That spasmodic start-stop effort won't cut it.
Action is the engine that drives the plan.
Yes. 3, a mind closed tightly against all negative and discouraging influences. This is huge. It means actively, consciously filtering out negative suggestions, doubts, criticisms, especially the source notes from relatives, friends, and acquaintances who might inadvertently or maybe even intentionally undermine your belief and resolve.
So building that mental shield specifically against that fear of criticism we just talked about.
Absolutely. It's presented as a direct countermeasure. And number 4, a friendly alliance. There's that mastermind group concept again, with 1 or more persons who will actively encourage you to follow through with both your plan and your purpose.
Okay, so clear purpose fueled by burning desire, a definite plan put into continuous action, actively blocking out negativity, and surrounding yourself with supportive allies. These 4 steps, the source claims, are basically the blueprint.
They are presented as essential, not just for getting rich, but for success in all walks of life. The source makes a really powerful claim here. that mastering these steps leads to personal freedom, independence, riches, if that's your goal, power, fame, recognition. It guarantees those favorable breaks that aren't just random luck.
Right.
And it allows you to convert your dreams, whatever they are, into tangible physical realities. Essentially, the source says it allows you to write your own ticket in life and make life yield whatever price you demand from it.
Now, the source then does something interesting. It takes this principle of persistence and applies it to a completely different area than business or ambition. It talks about the pursuit of love, using the story of Wallace Simpson and King Edward.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating and maybe controversial for some application of the principle. The source speculates, and it emphasizes it's speculating on the inner workings, that Wallace Simpson's success in winning King Edward's heart wasn't just accidental, not a stroke of luck.
What was it then, according to the source?
It argues it was based on a burning desire she held for a specific kind of relationship and a careful, persistent search for it over time.
So the idea is she knew what she was looking for, specifically long before she actually found it in him.
According to the source's interpretation, yes. She knew what she wanted long before meeting the king, and crucially, despite failing twice in previous marriages, she had the persistence, the courage to continue her search. She didn't give up on that core desire.
And her rise, her path to him, is described as persistent, but maybe inevitable because of that persistence.
Yes, the source uses the phrase slow, progressive, persistent order, but it was sure. She's held up as this astounding real-world example of applied persistence, overcoming what seemed like, unbelievably long odds. It claims she knew exactly what she wanted and, through her persistence, ultimately shook the greatest empire on earth to get it.
And King Edward's side of the story, how does the source portray his role?
It portrays him as a man born into immense, unasked-for riches and a crown he didn't actively seek or necessarily want. And despite having everything materially, he felt this deep emptiness inside that only love, the source suggests, could truly fill. Yeah. His greatest desire, the source argues, wasn't power or the throne, it was for love. And when he met Wallace, the source describes it as him recognizing a kindred spirit, someone who understood that deeper need, and he opened his heart to that possibility without fear or apology.
And his decision to give up the crown for her. That was obviously a huge price to pay, required immense courage.
It was. And the source defends his choice quite strongly. It notes he could have taken the easier path, pursued a clandestine affair, which probably would have avoided a lot of the public criticism and the constitutional crisis.
Right.
But he chose the open declaration, the abdication, because his love for her, the source asserts, was clean, deep, and sincere. It represented the one thing he truly desired above all the trappings of inherited power. He took what he wanted, the source says, and paid the price being the crown.
So the source presents them both, not just as historical figures caught in drama, but as powerful examples of persistence in searching for what it calls life's greatest treasure.
Exactly. It encourages the listener to follow their example, not necessarily in the specifics, but in the principle of identifying and persistently searching for what you truly demand of life, whatever that treasure might be for you. It is careful to state it's presenting the story as an illustration of the principle of persistence, acknowledging the controversy, but focusing on their persistence in pursuing a deeply held desire.
It does make you wonder, though, doesn't it? Is there something almost, mystical about this power of persistence? The source itself seems to kind of ponder this.
It does. It asks these big questions. What mystical power is it that gives people of persistence the capacity to master such incredible difficulties, to overcome odds that seem completely insurmountable? Does it somehow tap into supernatural forces? Does infinite intelligence, whatever you conceive that to be, somehow throw its weight behind the persistent person, even when everything material seems stacked against them?
And when the author looked closely at giants like Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, what did they find?
The source states that analyzing them over a long period, looking for the key to their success, revealed no single quality except persistence that even remotely suggested the major source of their stupendous achievements.
Really? Just persistence?
That's what the source claims was the standout consistent factor. Other qualities were there, sure, but persistence was the differentiator, the common thread in overcoming failure after failure.
And looking even further back, at historical figures often seen as having some extraordinary power or influence, prophets, philosophers.
An impartial study of prophets, philosophers, those sometimes called miracle men, great religious leaders throughout history. The source says it confirms this exact same pattern.
Which is?
It concludes that persistence, coupled with intense concentration of effort and absolute definiteness of purpose, were the major sources of their world-changing achievements as well. It wasn't just divine inspiration, perhaps, but also incredible human persistence.
And speaking of world-changing historical examples,
Mhm.
the source presents one more really astounding case study, Muhammad.
Yes, drawing on a book review from the time, Muhammad is highlighted as one of history's most incredible demonstrations of the sheer power of persistence to transform utter initial defeat into massive, lasting achievement.
What makes his story so compelling in this specific context of persistence?
Well, the source emphasizes several things. First, he apparently had no formal schooling. Second, he didn't even begin his mission, his prophetic work, until he was 40 years old.
Okay.
And then, for the first 10 years after starting, he faced intense ridicule, abuse. He was banished from his home city. Mecca lived in poverty. For a full decade, he had virtually nothing tangible to show for his efforts, just opposition.
10 years of struggle and apparent failure.
Right.
That's a level of persistence that's hard for most people to even conceive of.
Exactly. But then within another 10 years, his fortunes, and frankly the world's fortunes, had completely reversed. He became, the effective dictator of Arabia, ruler of Mecca, and the head of a new world religion that would eventually sweep across continents and shape history.
And the source attributes this incredible turnaround primarily
To the power of the words he shared, the Quran, which seemed miraculous given his lack of prior literary background, the efficacy he taught through prayer, and the core idea of man's direct kinship with God. Those ideas, persistently shared, eventually gained unstoppable momentum.
and he faced very real, powerful opposition, right? Not just general difficulty.
Oh, absolutely. Especially from the established businessmen, the capitalists of Mecca at the time. His ideas, things like equality before God, the vision of Islam as a kind of democratic state, and critically, his desire to destroy the idols in the Kaaba courtyard. These directly threatened their trade and their power structure, which relied heavily on the revenue from pilgrims coming to worship those idols.
So he persisted not just against doubt or hardship, but against powerful vested interests actively trying to stop him.
Exactly. And the rise of Islam is described as beginning like a democratic army, fueled by intense belief and a willingness among followers to die for that belief.
Hmm.
The source notes his initial approach invited Jews and Christians to join his single faith in one God, though they declined. It also makes a point of contrasting the relatively humane warfare practiced by his early armies, citing their entering Jerusalem without killing, based on an agreement of faith with the later actions of the Crusaders. And interestingly, it points out that Christians did eventually adopt one key Muslim idea: the university.
So his story, as presented here, stands as this powerful, almost unbelievable demonstration of how sheer, unwavering persistence, fueled by strong belief in a definite purpose, can transform initial, long-term, crushing defeat into massive, world-altering achievement, even against overwhelming odds. So wrapping this up, this deep dive into the source material on persistence, it really reframes it, doesn't it? It's presented as far more than just, grind to get out.
Yeah, it's positioned as the essential ingredient, the very carbon in the steel of character, as that analogy went. The thing required to achieve any significant desire you really set your heart on, whether that's building wealth, or finding deep love, or bringing a truly transformative idea into the world.
It really powerfully highlights the critical roles of having that intense burning desire,
Right.
needing a crystal clear purpose, having definite plans.
And actively building that mental shield to block out negativity and fear, especially the fear of criticism, and also wisely choosing supportive allies to form that vital mastermind alliance.
And it forces us, I think, to confront those internal enemies, particularly that pervasive, sneaky fear of criticism, which the source claims is the invisible force that stops most potentially great ideas before they even get a chance to move from just a thought into real action.
But the counterexamples are just as powerful, aren't they? From the giants of industry like Ford, through resilient artists like Fannie Hurst and Kate Smith, the profound personal journey framed for Wallace Simpson and King Edward, and even world-changing prophets like Muhammad. They all show that overcoming these obstacles, internal and external, through sustained, consistent, persistent effort, can lead to truly extraordinary results.
It really brings us right back to that provocative question the source itself poses near the end. What is that mystical power that gives men and women of persistence this incredible capacity, this ability to master difficulties that just crush other people.
Does infinite intelligence, or whatever force you believe in, does it somehow throw itself on the side of the person who holds faith and just persists, no matter how many obstacles, how many people seem to be arrayed against them?
It's a powerful thought to sit with, definitely. As you, listening, reflect on your own desires, your own plans, whatever they are, wherever you are on your journey. Maybe building a business, mastering a tough skill, pursuing a creative project, seeking a relationship.
The question this source leaves us with is pretty direct. Are you willing to pay the price of persistence?